Queen Victoria's private writings are a goldmine of shade, odd opinions, and did she really say that moments, because she kept diaries from age 13 until her death and wrote thousands of letters. We have a pretty good sense of how she felt about people, including her own kids, so if you're new to my channel, welcome. Here in this video, I'm going to give you real-life examples that historians have quoted within the diary of Queen Victoria. So thank you for watching, subscribe for more videos, and let me know in the comments who you want to see next. First, let's address the royal elephant in the nursery. Victoria hated pregnancy. She described childbirth as the shadow side of marriage, complained about babies ruining her figure, and referred to infants as frogs. Yes, frogs. Even though she had 9 children, she didn't exactly run to cuddle them in a nursery. Nannies were the real MVPs. There are a number of aspects of motherhood Victoria was openly displeased by. Above all, she loathed pregnancy, describing the experience in letters to her daughter as being like a dog or a cow. She was deeply critical of breastfeeding, considering it a ruin to intelligent young women, so much so, in fact, that she wrote in her diary upon finding out that her own daughters had chosen to breastfeed, "It makes my hair stand on end that my daughters have turned into cows. I find no especial pleasure or compensation in the company of the older children. I only feel properly a malaise, and quite happy when Albert is with me. Abstractedly, I have no tender for babies till they have become little humans. An ugly baby is a very nasty object, and the prettiest is frightful when undressed. In short, as long as they have their big body and little limbs and that terrible frog-like action. The greatest horror of having children, and would rather have none." Her sickly son Leopold. Soon after his birth, it became apparent that Queen Elizabeth disliked her 8th child, Prince Leopold. She often made drawings of her children and would portray them to look angelic as they were older by now. However, when it came to Leopold, she would always portray the young prince as if he was disfigured or grotesque. In her journal, Victoria describes her son as the ugliest and least pleasing of the whole family. As the excerpt continues, she says, "He walks shockingly and his manners are despairing, as well as his speech, which is quite dreadful." However, as Leopold got older, Victoria's opinion of him began to change, particularly after he was diagnosed with the blood clotting disease, hemophilia, at the age of 5. "Little Leopold, since we are here at Osborne, comes now along to my room, and to breakfast and luncheon, and is very good and very amusing and clever. He is a fine, chubby boy with the complexion, figure, and limbs somewhat like Afy, only taller," said Queen Victoria on the 8th of May in 1857. He became her unofficial secretary for a time, and she actually enjoyed his company. You see, this was Victoria's pattern: distant when they were babies, and more affectionate once they could hold a conversation. Here is Victoria's hot take on each of her kids. Victoria's diary is like the 19th century version of subtweeting your children. Bertie, the future Edward VII, she called him wild, lazy, and utterly untrustworthy, essentially the Victorian equivalent of, "This kid's going nowhere." She called him frightfully troublesome and an idle boy, and wrote in 1857, "Bertie bores me dreadfully, and that he shows no brains." She said he turns his back on everything good, and his mind is entirely in his trousers, which was after a teenage sex scandal. She later softened once he became a successful public figure. Vicky, the Princess Royal, her firstborn, the golden child. She called her first baby red, fat, and not at all pretty, but later softened up and adorned her, calling her clever and angelic. Alice. Victoria wrote she was so absorbed in religious and social issues that she was almost morbid. She complained Alice never lets me alone and is too serious for her own good. Alfred was good-hearted but slow. Helena was amiable but dull and lacked brightness. Louise. She liked Louise's artistic streak but thought she was too independent, self-willed, and must be curbed. Arthur was good and steady. He got off lately. And Beatrice, the baby, her favorite. She called Beatrice her darling and kept her close as a companion. So did she like children at all? The short answer, not really. She liked the idea of family as a dynastic insurance, but the messy, sticky, crying reality of kids, hard pass. She once wrote babies were unpleasant little creatures and complained of never-ending pregnancies. Yet she also expected her daughters to crank out grandbabies for the family tree. Victoria wasn't exactly baking cookies in the palace kitchen, but she did care about her children's welfare. She obsessed over their health and arranged prestigious tutors. She cared about who they married and about their public image, and she also visited them when they were sick. But warmth was not her specialty. As the kids grew up, Victoria mellowed, especially after Albert's death in 1861. She leaned on her children emotionally, particularly Beatrice and Leopold. Letters show she generally grew affectionate towards them as adults. It's like she liked her kids once they weren't kids anymore. So the verdict, was she a good mom? By modern standards, yikes. By 19th century royal standards, pretty average. She didn't ignore them entirely, but left daily parenting to others. She wanted dynastic stability, not playdates. Other shade she included in her diary was her mother, the Duchess of Kent. In 1837, she wrote, "I can never love my mother," and complained she kept me like a prisoner under John Conroy's influence. On her uncle, King George IV, she described him as a horrid man, fat and dissolute. On Prince Albert's relatives, she called some Coburg relatives tiresome and sponging. She described Albert's brother Ernst as a rake and utterly unreliable. On childbirth and motherhood, an ugly baby is a very nasty object. I think people are mad to have so many children. She ironically wrote this while pregnant with her 9th. For her prime ministers, she called Lord Palmerston that odious man and a bore. She nicknamed Benjamin Disraeli Dizzy, but later doted on him, writing, "He flatters me and he always amuses me." She called Gladstone a half-crazy old fanatic and a disagreeable old man. On fashion, she wrote that women's crinolines were absurd and dangerous, but also fun to watch. And on feminism, I am most anxious to enlist everyone who can speak or write to join in checking this mad, wicked folly of women's rights, with all its attendant horrors, on which her poor, feeble sex is bent, forgetting every sense of womanly feelings and propriety. Feminists ought to get a good whipping. Were women to unsex themselves by claiming equality with men, they would become the most hateful, heathen, and disgusting of beings and would surely perish without male protection. We, women, are not made for governing, and if we are good women, we must dislike these masculine occupations. There are times which force one to take interest in them, and I do, of course, intently. She wrote about the Irish during the famine as poor and miserable creatures, but also called them wild and excitable, which was a condescending mix of pity and stereotyping. On Napoleon III, he was a cunning little man with a thin face. On Tsar Alexander II, who was her relative, he was good-looking, but slow. You see, the patterns historians noticed was when it came to babies, they were immediate postpartum disgust. Most of her horrible remarks about babies comes right after birth when she was tired, sore, and frustrated. She flipped from harsh criticism to gushing praise once a child did something to impress her. Nicknames she used as weapons. She loved calling people tiresome, idle, stupid, dull, or angelic. And at the end of the day, for all the shade she grew in her diary, she kept her children close in adulthood, showing that even queens mellow with time. Through this private lens, she could be dismissive, elitist, sarcastic, but also gushy, affectionate, and funny. Historians call it one of the most complete warts and all records of a monarch's inner voice. And that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I have the entire British royal family tree on my channel to see how each monarch was related to one another. Subscribe for more, as each of your subscriptions does help this channel grow. It allows me to continue making more content for you. Let me know in the comments who you want to see next. I do make a list of audio suggestions, and I will see you in the next one.